The snow was falling harder now, flakes gathering on the shoulders of a woman who stood motionless outside the cafe window. Her gloved hands were trembling, not from the cold alone, but from something deeper, something that had been breaking inside her for years. Her coat, a faded brown thing with worn seams and a missing button near the collar, hung loosely over her frail frame. It wasn't the kind of coat you'd expect someone to wear on a first date, but it was all she had. She'd almost turned back twice, her courage slipping away like the melting snow at her boots. But she had promised herself, just this once, she would stop running from life. So she stepped inside the cafe, her heart pounding like thunder beneath the layers of wool. The warmth of the place wrapped around her instantly, but it couldn't melt the fear that filled her chest when she saw him, Ethan Parker, waiting by the window. He looked up from his phone, smiled, and stood. Tall, composed, wrapped in a black winter coat that screamed success and confidence, he was everything she wasn't. For a brief second, their eyes met, and she wanted to disappear. She knew what she must look like, her hair half damp from the snow, her shoes cheap and scuffed, her old coat too big to hide the truth of her life. If this story already caught your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes kindness and second chances can change lives in ways we never imagine. Her name was Lily. She had once been a dreamer, the kind of girl who believed the world was soft and kind. But life had taught her otherwise. After her father passed away and her mother fell ill, Lily had dropped out of college to work 2 jobs. She cleaned offices at night and waited tables by day, barely scraping enough to pay for her mother's medication. Every winter she promised herself a new coat, but every year that money went to something more urgent, more necessary. So when Ethan, who she'd met through a community charity drive, asked her out for coffee, she hesitated for days. He was everything her world didn't hold anymore. Educated, well-dressed, gentle, and with eyes that seemed to see past the walls people built around themselves. But Lily didn't believe someone like him could really understand someone like her. Still, curiosity and a quiet hunger for something kind had brought her here. She took a seat, apologizing softly for being late. Ethan smiled, his eyes kind, and said it was fine, that he was just glad she came. But Lily noticed how his gaze flickered, just once, toward her coat. Her stomach tightened. She felt the weight of shame pressing down on her, making every word she said feel like a struggle. They talked at first about safe things, weather, books, the charity drive. But as the minutes passed, Lily found herself letting her guard down. Ethan's voice had a calmness to it, a patience that drew her out of her shell. She told him how she loved painting, but hadn't picked up a brush in years, how her mother's illness had changed everything, how she sometimes felt invisible in a world that only saw what people wore, not who they were. Ethan listened, really listened, and something about that made her heart ache. But as the snow outside turned heavier, she knew the time would come when he'd have to leave, and with him, this fragile warmth she'd allowed herself to feel. When they finished their coffee, Ethan suggested a walk through the park nearby. Lily wanted to say no. Her boots were thin, her coat barely warm, but something in his tone made her agree. The park was quiet, covered in a white stillness that felt like peace. They walked side by side, their breath rising in clouds, the crunch of snow beneath their feet the only sound between words. But then came the wind, sharp, cruel. It cut through Lily's coat like a knife, and she shivered violently. She tried to hide it, to pull the edges of her coat tighter, but Ethan noticed. He stopped, watching her struggle with the fabric, and his expression changed. Lily's face flushed red. She looked away, humiliated. And that's when she thought it would happen, that he would see her, really see her, and walk away. Because that's what people did. They left when things didn't look pretty, but Ethan didn't move away. Instead, he took a step closer. Without a word, he slipped off his coat and placed it gently over her shoulders. She froze. His coat was warm, soft, carrying the faint scent of cedar and something clean, familiar. It was so different from the rough fabric pressing against her skin. "You'll catch a cold," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to take it back, to keep his kindness for someone who deserved it. But when she looked up, she saw his eyes. And they weren't filled with pity. They were filled with something else, something steady and real. They kept walking, slower now. Ethan's hands were shoved into his pockets, his breath fogging in the cold. Lily wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small, because in that single act he hadn't just given her warmth, he'd given her dignity. The next week she saw him again, and again. Coffee turned into lunches, lunches into long walks, and long walks into evenings when they'd just sit by the frozen lake and talk about everything they'd never said to anyone else. Lily told him about her fears, about the guilt that followed her for not doing more for her mother. Ethan told her about his past too, how he'd once lost someone he loved, and how it had made him afraid to open up again. The more they talked, the less she worried about her coat, her shoes, her job. Because when he looked at her, he didn't see any of those things. He saw her. One day she came home to find her mother worse than before. The hospital called later that night. The bills were more than she could afford. She sat in the dark, tears streaming down her face, clutching the edge of that same old coat as if it could shield her from everything. The next morning she went to work with swollen eyes. Ethan came by the cafe that evening, waiting by the same table they'd first shared. When he saw her, he stood immediately, worry flashing in his eyes. She tried to smile, to pretend everything was fine, but her voice cracked. She told him everything, about the bills, about how she didn't know what to do anymore. Ethan didn't speak. He simply reached across the table and took her hands. His palms were warm, steady. He said quietly, "You've carried too much alone, Lily. Let someone help." She shook her head, the old fear rising again. The fear of owing someone, of being a burden. But Ethan didn't let go. That evening, when he walked her home, he didn't say another word. He just stayed beside her. Sometimes love doesn't need promises, it just needs presence. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Her mother's condition stabilized thanks to a treatment program Ethan quietly helped arrange through his company's health foundation. Lily never asked how, she just knew he had done something kind without wanting credit for it. One evening, as the snow melted and spring began to whisper through the city, Lily found herself standing by that same park bench where it all began. She was wearing a new coat this time, simple but beautiful. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, smiling softly when he saw her. She tried to give his coat back, the one he'd wrapped around her that day, but he shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "It looks better on you." And for the first time, she didn't feel embarrassed or small. She felt enough. Sometimes love doesn't arrive wrapped in flowers or fancy words. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a borrowed coat, a kind gesture, or a moment when someone decides not to leave. Months later, when Lily walked into her art gallery opening, the one she never believed she'd have, Ethan stood quietly in the back, watching her glow. Her paintings were filled with warmth, with light, with the softness of snow and the strength of people who refused to stop believing. At the center of the exhibit was one painting, a woman standing in the snow, her old coat slipping off her shoulders as a man gently placed his over her. The title read, "He Stayed." If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because kindness still exists, and sometimes it shows up when you least expect it. Special request, tell us in the comments, do you believe one act of kindness can change someone's whole life? And as the evening lights faded, Lily looked around the gallery, her eyes finding Ethan's across the crowd. For a long moment, they didn't speak. They didn't need to, because in a world that often turned cold, they had found something worth holding on to. Warmth, not from the fire, but from each other. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. She thought he'd leave after seeing her old coat, but instead he wrapped his around her. And in that moment, she learned, love doesn't judge, it simply stays.